Okay, in this one, this is going to be a big episode, by the way. We're going to hook up all the state that we need for our application. And if you work with React before, you probably use state quite a bit. For example, I want to increase the quantity of this, right? I want to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when I click on the plus or minus. So the way you'd be doing that is you'd go over to, the component that you want to do it. So in this case is slug here, right? And you'd import, you don't need to follow along, this is just a little example here. You'd import use state from React. This autocomplete is weird, so just remove that and keep React. And then in here, again, example, this will be removed. You'd make essentially like a variable here that says quantity and set quantity. So one is kind of like your variable with the number, and one lets you modify it. So let's set this equal to use state, and by default I want this to be 1. All right, so here by default I want the number to be 1, the quantity. So we'd go here and we change this to quantity like that. Let's see if that works, and look at that, it does. So now if I want to modify this data, I'm just going to add this in line here quickly. So on the plus, for example, I can do an on click, and I can run an arrow function where I set the quantity, I believe that's what I wrote, set QTI, to, I can get the previous state, so whatever number I had in there, and then I can do previous state plus 1. All right, and that should increase it just like that. Now the problem is this works just fine, but what if I want to share the state somewhere else? I cannot do that. Like I want to take this 8, and when I add to cart, I want it to show up here as I have eight quantities of this product in the cart. I cannot do that. I cannot just go over to maybe my nav or maybe my index page and access the data in here. The only way, let me start removing this. We're going to clean it up. So delete that, delete this, delete this. The only way we can share the data is by passing it down in props. So here, if I'd render out another component, I could pass it down, but I'm not rendering out anything else. Here in my homepage, if I have a state here, I could pass it down here to product, and I'd have it available in the product. But that's about it. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a global state essentially with context. So rather than having all of our logic in here, we'll separate it to a new file, and that's going to keep our components relatively nice and clean. So in the lib, let's create another little file here called component context.js, and we're going to add all the code here. So do that, and then we're going to say import react comma create context, and then we're going to say use context and use state. So we'll add all the logic here from React. So the first step is to create this context, this global state, and we can give it any name we want. In this case, we're only going to have one, but if your application is bigger and you want to have different kinds of contexts, maybe that one specific to like the users, so you can say user context, or maybe one specific to keeping track of like orders or everything, okay? Then you can create an order context. In this case, we're just going to call it shop context, okay? And set this equal to create context. So that's it. That's how you create the context. Pretty simple so far. Next up, we're gonna create a another function here called our state context, and we're gonna set this equal to an arrow function. And here, what we're gonna return is going to be something called a context dot provider. Sorry, not context, this shop context dot provider. Okay, so essentially you can imagine that up here, let's add our state. All right, this is our data for the state. So whether it's quantity, let's do the same example we did earlier on, set qti and set this equal to use state, and we'll pass down 1. Okay, so basically every component in here, so you create the shop context and then you use this provider, and everything that you add here is gonna have access to this data. So your quantity, right? So if I wanna render out the product details here, I wanna render out the home page. So index.js, right? That would be rendered out here. So you basically add all the components in here. The problem is though, how do I do that? How do I easily just take the state context and wrap my whole application around it? Well, React gives you a little prop called children, and this is like a dynamic little prop. So if you pass children in here, like that, now basically I can take the state context and wrap my application around. It's just kind of the same way we did it in URQL here. And that's going to automatically recognize the components that are being rendered in it. All right, so this is a nice way to kind of keep it separate rather than taking this whole logic, this shop context provider, and moving it in here. We can just do it in this file and do children. So now I can take the state context here that I'm exporting and just import it in my app. So let's do that. So we'll do import state context like that, and I'm just gonna wrap my application around it like that. So now the children are gonna be, well, the rest of the components. And that's all you have to do. So now all of this data, any data that you wanna pass down to the children, you can specify it in here. So all you need to do is say value, like that. And yeah, I can pass down, make sure you add another curly brackets, and I'm just gonna say QTI, and that's it. Let's also wrap this in a pair of parentheses here, like that. It's gonna remove it. No, it's not. Perfect. So now we pass down quantity in here, and now every children is gonna have access to it. So that's essentially it, really. There's not much else to it. And then all the functions that we want to make, we are going to create in here. So again, if you want to, again, separate it into multiple different files, feel free to do that, but we're going to keep this nice and clean and simple. Okay, so let's see, do we have any errors now? Okay, so quantity is not being recognized here, and the slug. So let's just go back here and add QTI for now. Well, 0, but anyway, 0. So now that our application is wrapped around this, how do we use it? Well, we can use this use context. So the way you use it is you go to any component now that you want. So in this case, let's go over to our slug. Again, this is going to be an example. I'm just going to import the shop context. We should give this an export as well. I think we can specify it here, export default shop context, like that. So you go in here, you import the context that you want, in this case, the shop context, and then you import the use context from React. All right, so the context that you want, and then use context from React. And then example here again, because we're gonna do it a bit differently. I'm gonna do import, not import, but I'm gonna say const, and I wanna pull out the quantity, because we are passing it down here as a value. Use context, and the context that I wanna use, which is shop context. And that should be it. I should be able to console log QTI here, and we should be all nice and dandy. So let's take a look at that. Oh, we have some errors. Let's do refresh. But look at that, 1. So we are getting it. Perfect. Now, what I want to do is simplify this a bit. I don't want to import shop context and then use it here like that. That's a bit redundant because we only have one anyway. So let's remove all of this. Rather than doing it separately like this, I want to just import one thing. So the way we can do that here in the context is I can say export const, and I'm going to call this use state context, which is going to be a function that just use context, and I pass down the shop context. Okay, so I'm basically simplifying this a bit. I'm just going to use the context here, and then I can just import use state context, and that's it. It's just a way for me to just make it one line of code here. So I can just do import use state context like that, and then I can just do const quantity equals to use state context. Okay, either way you want to do it. I like this because it's just one line of code. It's a bit more simple, but I should be able to get the same data in here. So if I do a console log of that, look at that, we still have 1. Okay, cool. So that works just fine. Let's see what we should do next. Let's also add a little comment here. Say use state. Just separate these out a little bit, just so it's nice and clean. There we go. All right, give a bit of space. Cool. All right, so let's add a bit more logic here. We have quantity. Let's make some functions here. So make a bit of space again. I'm gonna say let's give the ability to increase the product quantity. Okay, so it's gonna be just a const increase QTI is gonna be equal to a function, and I'm gonna say set QTI to previous QTI and prev QTI plus 1. Essentially the same thing we did in that slug here when we added the plus minus. So I can create functions here as well that uses the state and then just take this increase quantity and pass it down wherever I want. So I'll just take this now. Here in the values, I can not only pass down the state, but also functions that use the state. So I can go over to my slug. Here, I can add increase QTI, and that's it. So if I want to use it, let's go over here. So this is gonna be on the plus circle. I can do onClick. Hey, increase the QTI. And that's it, look at that. Oh, this is 0 here, so let's also change this from 0 to QTI. Look at that, 1. Boom, 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 boom. Yay, it works. So now what we can do is also make a decrease. So let's go over here. Let's make a function called decrease product quantity. And I'm gonna say const decrease QTI. It's gonna be equal to an arrow function. I'm gonna set the QTI here. Again, we can get the previous state, so previous QTI, whatever the number currently is in our application. And I can run an arrow function here where I'm gonna say if the previous QTI minus 1 is smaller than 1, so I never want it to be smaller than 1 essentially, because you don't want to go to 0 or minus 1, minus 2, because then the shop will give you money for the products, right? We're going to return. So do nothing. Do not go lower than that. Return 1. Sorry, I'm going to say return 1. So if they try to go lower than 1, just keep it at 1 and always send back 1. Otherwise, I'm going to return the previous quantity, so whatever number we are on, and just subtract 1 from it. Okay, so now we can add it here in the values again and just import it here in my use context. How nice is this? Any component I want to use this information in, I can just go, whether it's index, I can just go here and import that use state and just add this one line of code and I can use the data. So decrease quantity, we'll go over here to the minus, onClick, and we're gonna say decrease quantity. Let's take a look. Does that work? 1, there we go, and decrease, it works. Yes, see, I cannot go lower than 1 because it's gonna return 1 every time. Okay, so that might be it. Let's add 1 or 2 more here. Let's keep adding to the state. Let's go to the top, so we have our quantity being set. Let's also add show cart and set show cart. And by default, this is gonna be use state false. All right, so by default, this is gonna be closed, but when we click on it, it's gonna open up a little, it's gonna slide open nicely here for us. So that's gonna be 1, and also cart items and set cart items. It's gonna be equal to use state and an empty pair of arrays. So basically what I want to do is every time I add something to the cart, I want to take all the information of this product and just save it in the state. It's going to become useful when I want to render out the cart items in here, and then also the items in Stripe. I want to display them there. So just always keep track of where they are. And I think we are gonna leave it at that for now. I'm just gonna take them and pass them down here in the value and then add the functionality later. So that and that, and we'll leave this cart items for now. And yeah, I think that's gonna be it for now. In the next episode, we'll start creating the functionality for opening up the cart and all of that good jazz. But that's quite a bit now for this episode. It's getting quite long. So let's leave it there. All right, see you in the next one.